Greetings, ladies and gentlemen. You are listening to Firing Synapses. This is a show all about exploration. I will learn what makes you, you. This includes your hobbies, passions, whatever else drives an emotion. However, if you want to come on just to vent about what's currently bothering you, I'm perfectly fine with that as well. My goal for this show is for you to have a good time, learn something, and have the opportunity to talk about what you normally would not get a chance to share with others. Thank you, and enjoy. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the show. For those return listeners, I thank you very much. I appreciate all the love. For those of you who are new to this endeavor, I am your host, Matt. Joining me on today's episode, the host of Talk Ag to Me. Please, everyone, welcome Brandon to the show. Hi, Brandon.
Hey, how's it going?
I'm glad you can come on to the show. Today, you sent me a long list of things that you're passionate about, which I can totally appreciate that because I don't know what your birth sign is, but I'm a Scorpio, so I have a lot of passions across a lot of things. And one of the things that you sent was agriculture, which I really have a little knowledge to agriculture. So if you wouldn't mind, kind of give a brief overview of how you're involved with agriculture.
Yeah, for sure. So first of all, thanks for having me. It's sure a pleasure to be able to come on here and talk to you about what I'm passionate about. As you mentioned, I do have a long list of passions, but agriculture is probably my main one. That and kind of the public speaking, education kind of stuff we talked about before. But so I was born and raised in Central California, and I was raised all around dairy farms, and I was agricultural community. And I spent most of my life, surrounded by farmers. That was kind of our community was just all farmers. So I kind of have had farming in my blood my entire life. My family hasn't owned land or animals or anything like that, but we've worked for farmers and we've been close with those families for since long before I was here. So I got into high school and I got really, really involved in agriculture. So I joined a program called FFA, which I don't know if you're familiar with the program at all. But FFA is the Future Farmers of America. It's a youth leadership organization that's all about developing kids into leaders, teaching them public speaking kind of stuff, job interview, resume building, networking, just like overall trying to boost their confidence and like their just ability to kind of work in the professional realm. And it's all based in agriculture. So they teach kids that kind of stuff using agriculture as examples. And so that like the when I did my public speaking training, I learned how to speak by speaking about agricultural issues. And when I did like my job interview training, I applied for agriculture based jobs. When I did leadership training, it was all around agriculture based leadership positions. So like everything I learned through food production kind of education. And so that kind of inspired me to go on and create my podcast, the Talk Ag to Me. And in Talk Ag to Me, my entire goal is to try to bring people on that don't know anything about agriculture and to help them learn something about where their food comes from, the processes it goes through to get there, and everything involved in the industry. And that's more than just farming. It has to do with science and technology and policy kind of stuff. And we even have some fun episodes where we talk about how agriculture ties into things like movies and video games and TV shows. And it's kind of just it's a fun place for us to talk about, food and everything that involves it. And so that's kind of my story. Now I'm a junior in college and I'm studying to be an agriculture teacher myself, to kind of give back to the community that raised me. So I'm, very passionate about agriculture, but also about helping people, learn, not just about agriculture, but just in general, learning new things and kind of finding their passions and that kind of stuff. So, yeah.
So, I mean, I know you said you do a lot of like public speaking and stuff like that. So does the FFA do anything with like 4-H? Do you kind of work with them, or is that kind of like it's similar but in a different fashion?
So 4-H is similar to FFA. They're two different organizations, and FFA does tend to work with 4-H on some things, but most of the time 4-H is kind of its own thing, and FFA is its own thing. Typically at 4-H, 4-H is for kids who are between the ages of 9 and 21. And typically it's kind of more 9 to 14ish, and then they transition into FFA. Some of them stay in 4-H, they don't want to do FFA, so they just stick with their 4-H group, and they just kind of follow that path out until they turn 21 and then they're out. The FFA is for it doesn't have an age restriction. It's more grade restricted, so it's 7th grade to senior year, but you can technically do some things in FFA until you're 21. But yeah, so like while they cover similar things and they kind of have similar themes to them, they technically are separate organizations.
So like 4-H is kind of like the stepping stone to get into FFA type of thing.
Yeah.
Now, I'm sure like FFA, they do they offer like certain programs to like grants and things like that for the youth coming up to get them more involved into agriculture and get them into schools and things like that?
Yeah, so I mean, FFA has a lot of different, pieces to it to help out students get more and more involved in agriculture. So a big portion of FFA is showing animals, and so 4-H does something similar. So you're able to raise and show livestock of a variety of different species. So it can be beef cattle, dairy cattle, goats, sheep, hogs, chickens, turkeys. There's even some horse showing, but that's less common in FFA chapters. And so depending on what your chapter has the ability to fund, you can get you can get the ability to show animals and take them to the county fair and you exhibit them and you sell them for money. And the entire purpose behind that is to try to teach kids both responsibility, but also like business practices and proper animal husbandry skills, and how to take care of an animal and feed it and take care, and to make sure it's healthy and give it medicine and all those sorts of things. But in terms of FFA helping out with that process, they basically provide all of the education that goes into how to do those things. And sometimes they will provide the funding. It kind of depends on the program. If the program has a lot of funding in it, then they can usually allocate some to the kids that are struggling and kind of help them pay off their projects. Other times it comes out of the kids' pocket. It just kind of depends on the size of the chapter. But what often happens is by being an FFA, a lot of those students are eligible for high dollar scholarships, and they like if you have FFA on your resume, going into a lot of ag based colleges and a lot of other like industry based colleges and even jobs. If you have FFA on your resume, you're probably going to get a pretty good recommendation from that, just because people that know what FFA is really value the experience that kids get from it, and so it can help out with both the experience because of the name, but also some financial benefit as well.
Is there any? I know this is going to be a very like vague question, but agriculture spreads out a lot of fields between like livestock, like plants and stuff like that. Like I said, I'm sorry. If I'm very ignorant in my terminology, I'm sorry. Like I'm trying to learn new things. That's why I have guests on the show to talk about their passion, because I don't know a lot about it. But is there a particular, what I want to say, subgenre or genre or field or that you in particular like more than others? That like if there was a project dealing with root vegetables, that's your jam. That's what you go for.
Yeah, so definitely. Because of my, my role as an educator, I have to know a lot about a variety of different sections of agriculture. So I would like to say I'm fairly well educated on different aspects of plant science, animal science, mechanics, genetic science, technology, policy, all that kind of stuff. Like I know about all of that, and I can speak on most of it. But I would say that animal science is kind of my main focus. As an ag educator, I'm going to eventually have to pick a specialization for what subject I prefer to teach, and I chose animal science as my specialization. So because I feel a lot more connected to animals than I do to plants, and crop science is definitely interesting to me. But I just grew up with cows, and I just love being around cows, and so that's kind of my bread and butter, And so I think that if I were to pick kind of a subsection of agriculture that I kind of lean towards the most, it'd be either the beef or dairy industries. More particularly the beef. I was raised around dairy industry, so I know the dairy industry like the back of my hand, and I love working in it. But there's something special to me about the beef industry. I love working with the cattle. I love learning about the everything that goes into it. And despite popular belief, it's very different than the dairy industry. And pretty sure I speak for a lot of people when I say that I love hamburgers and steak, and so learning where they come from is pretty cool to me.
So, I mean, you just said that the beef and dairy are your kind of your stronger suits, but and they're differ. How do they differ from the beef category to the dairy?
So typically, obviously the main difference is the terminal status of the animal. So what I mean by that is in the dairy industry, we typically don't just send any animal to beef. We usually like to keep our heifers and our cows out for a while so we can milk them and kind of take care of them until they're at the end of their productive life cycle, and then we send them to beef. Whereas on the beef ranch, we just kind of raise them and fatten them up and then send them straight to beef. They don't really serve any other purpose than besides just producing the meat that's on them. And so that's kind of the main difference, is just what they're oriented towards, and that results in there being a lot of differences. So in the dairy side of things, like grass fed and like range dairy cattle are a lot more rare than they are in the beef industry. Typically you have dairy cattle in corrals, they have barns, they have entire setups that are structured around keeping those dairy animals enclosed in a specific area, and that has to do with sanitary reasons, just to keep them safe and make sure they don't wander off and get hurt or anything like that, because as they're carrying around a lot of milk with them, it's more difficult for them to run or get away from it, from a random predator or whatever the case may be. It's easier and safer to keep them in an enclosed area. And so the dairy industry is more oriented around what's called a CAFO or a CAFO, and that stands for Confined Animal Feeding Operation. And whereas the beef industry, typically you see beef cattle more out on pasture or on grass-fed type of operations. There are some feedlot operations that are structured similar to a dairy, but there's you would see more of the grass-fed operation in a beef kind of setup than a dairy setup. AFOs or AFOs, and those are animal feeding operations. So main difference is just kind of the confinement. There's differences of how long we keep animals, what we feed them, the way we structure pens, the way we vaccinate them, types of antibiotics. The only similarity between the two is that they're both bovine. That's about it. Everything else is pretty different.
You said you for the dairy, you try to keep your heifers in a closed off area because they can't get away. Try to hold them from the predators and stuff like that, and then eventually they'll be sent off to slaughter. Is there a time period of which they're no longer good for dairy, and they move on to the second phase, their final phase, what have you?
Yeah. So it depends on the cow and it depends on the operation. Typically, obviously there's a difference between different breeds. So you have Holstein cows, which are the black and white ones, and then you have Jersey cows, which are the brown ones. And there's some other breeds that we use too, but those are kind of the two primary breeds used in dairy. The difference in those two is also in their maturation. So a Holstein cow might not last as long as a Jersey cow in terms of how long it can milk out before we have to beef it. It might last longer because Holsteins on average actually produce more milk than Jerseys do. So it kind of just depends the cow on an individual basis. Typically they may last 4 to 6 years is kind of what you can get out of a cow before it's no longer going to be producing milk, and then you send it to beef. But you have some cows that'll live to be 10. You have some cows that'll they'll only produce for a couple of years and then they go dry. Kind of it's almost like rolling a dice. You kind of got to get lucky and kind of see how long you can keep that cow going until eventually it outlives its purpose. And so obviously dairymen don't like to send cows to slaughter if they don't have to, because they can keep getting milk from them. They can keep using them for production of new calves that can give back into the cycle. But if a cow outlives its purpose and it's just eating food and it's not producing anything, then at that point it's just wasting money, and so it needs to go on to the next step of the process.
In general, obviously, your dairy cows are more sought after because they can produce a lot longer than your beef, because your beef is one and done, where your dairy is over 4 to 10 year process.
Typically, yeah, but again, it depends on there's a lot of factors involved there. So like the dairy kind of setup is more ideal for somebody who's oriented around a dairy sustainable economy. So in California, obviously, or for example, California is very dairy oriented. We're actually we fight for the top, the number one position in the United States for the top dairy producing state. So we fight with Wisconsin, Texas, and New York, and the four of us kind of like to trade spots constantly. And so um, typically, if you have a very dairy centric environment, then that's going to benefit, raising dairy. Obviously, if you have a very beef centric environment, that's going to benefit raising beef. That's why beef is more common in the Midwest, where there's more rangeland and there's easier infrastructure to be used for beef production versus in California, where we have not a whole lot of room for rangeland, because for one, we don't have enough water to maintain it, and for two, we just don't really have that much land left in general for that kind of stuff. So the land we do have, we usually convert into dairy just because it's easier, it's more efficient, it's more cost effective. But typically, in terms of the cattle themselves, they're used for different things. So I mean, like a dairy cow isn't going to necessarily be more ideal than a beef cow because of its longevity, but because they're used differently. Beef cattle are, you feed them out for a year, maybe two, and then you beef them, but they're also going to give you a lot more product than a dairy cow will. A dairy cow might take 10 years and you get some half decent beef that's going to go to McDonald's, whereas a beef cow, you can take it out in 2 years, but it's going to go to some gourmet restaurant, make you a lot more money. So it really just varies on the operation and the location.
That was kind of my next question. So do the dairy cows that get, are past their prime, they go to different organizations compared to the ones that are fed for, beef and for that category?
Yeah. Your fast food based meats, so like McDonald's and Wendy's and Carl's Jr., all of those meat typically come from dairy cows. And that's not to say that that dairy cows, or like the all lower quality meat is from a dairy cow, but typically beef cattle they're raised for their beef, so their meat's going to be higher quality. So I actually got to tour a slaughterhouse facility, which was really interesting to watch, and that's how I figured out, like, I'm sure you've heard the rumors that McDonald's like has, they use fake meat, or that, that their meat is made from some non, organic substance, that it's, some kind of synthetic, like whatever it is. That was kind of which again, it's a firsthand account, so I'm not sure how much you can trust it, but that was kind of my proof against that argument, is that, I actually saw the cows on the rack, and they were all, they all had tags on where they're going to go next. One was tagged In-N-Out, one was tagged Wendy's, one was tagged McDonald's. And so they all are marked for where they're going next in their process. And so there's actually a machine at the end of the slaughterhouse that grinds up any meat that's left over, because they do not waste anything whenever they slaughter an animal. When it gets broken down, they take all the different cuts from it and send the cuts off to where the cuts are going. And then they take all the organs and send the organs off somewhere. They literally take every last bit of that animal and they use it for something. Nothing gets wasted or thrown out. But any meat that they can't use for anything, so like, let's just say they have a tri-tip that's not high enough quality to be turned into a steak or a burger, they grind it up into ground beef and they sell it at like Taco Bell. There's actually, in the slaughterhouse I went to, they have a grinder that they call the Taco Bell machine, because that's where they just grind up all the remaining meat and send it there. Not saying it's bad, but that's just, that was the meat that wasn't kind of quality to go into like a retail kind of market, or to go into somewhere that's going to have like a higher quality like burger or steak.
Well, so what do they do with all like the bones and the teeth and things like that? I mean, is that all kind of go into the Taco Bell machine? I mean,
No, so bones, hooves, horns, teeth, all that kind of stuff, that gets turned to like dog bones. Some of it gets turned into like treats for pets. Some of it gets grinded up and used for medicine. They actually take a lot of like the fats and bones, stuff like that, and synthesize them into plastics that they use for make like computer chips, and obviously they use them to make like like basically surfaces that aren't like made from like anything that's made from like a plastic or like some kind of polymer. Typically, some of those plastics are going to be used from animal fats and bones and that kind of stuff.
I don't think I would have ever thought about, a cow's going to go into, a table or whatever. That's not, but so you talk about how you went to a slaughterhouse, and I'm sure that's not the first time you've seen it happen. How difficult was it to see, like, the first time the process, the circle of life, if you would, is that, were you a young kid when that happened, or I mean, how does that go about?
I mean, so I saw a dead cow for the first time when I was a kid, and that was kind of, I mean, no kid likes seeing a dead animal, so it was kind of rough to see. But I didn't like freak out, or just swore on never eating meat again or anything like that. my reaction to the first time actually seeing the process, I think I was a freshman in high school the first time I saw it. I watched a video on it first, and then my first time seeing it in person, I think I was either a junior or senior in high school. Um, it was so the animals that I saw were animals that I had raised. So that made it a little bit harder because I actually had an attachment to those animals. But at the end of the day, I told myself that the reason that we do the process is so somebody in the world can eat. So somebody has dinner on their plate for another day. So you kind of when you look at it from that perspective, because there's this mentality of especially on like social media and in the public's eye that farmers don't care about their animals, or that they send them off to slaughter without a second thought. Okay, so a lot of farmers actually care very deeply about their animals and get somewhat upset when they have to send an animal to beef, especially if it was a good, like let's just say the dairy industry. If they have a cow that's been milking for 10 years and they have to beef her, that's going to be a sad day for that. It's you have to constantly remind yourself, we're giving these animals the best life they could possibly have. We're feeding them the best diets, they're getting the best exercise, they're getting the best everything, and in return they'll go on to feed a bunch of families. And so that made washing the process easier. But I still think the first time I saw it, it was kind of like the scientific part of my brain was excited, and like the emotional part of my brain was like, oh, I raised that thing. That's kind of sad. But so it's a little bit of a conflict. But at the end of the day, like, if you acknowledge what the purpose is behind it, and you acknowledge like, that it's all done very cleanly and ethically, and that, it's all quick and like they don't feel anything, it makes you feel a bit better afterwards.
So, I mean, after like a couple, like the second or sixth or whatever, you kind of get the notion of the good outweighs the bad, if you would. That's, yes, you have to put this down, but you're also feeding families upon families with this one heifer or cow or whatever you have. I know earlier you talked about the politics of agriculture. How does that uh, fit into this equation?
So politics is a very it plays a massive role in agriculture, and honestly it shouldn't. There's people that say all the time that food shouldn't be a political issue, and I agree. But by the definition of politics, food is a political issue. Politics is described as finding a best way to allocate resource, and food is a resource, and so we have to find a way to allocate it and allocate the resources that go into growing it, and so that brings politics into play. A lot of the politics that you'll see involved in agriculture tends to be with regulation, and so that has to do with you know ways that food is grown, and restrictions on how food is grown and how farmers are able to do their do their practices. And so a lot of the regulations tend to be okay. It's when the problem starts to arise when over regulation comes into play. So I don't think there's any farmer that's going to argue that regulation doesn't need to happen at all. Most farmers tend to agree with that. It tends to be when over regulation is shutting down small farmers that it starts to become an issue. And people will often advocate for more regulation because they think that large scale farming is causing damage to the environment, or that it's causing damage to the economy, or that's dangerous for the workers, or whatever the case may be. And so they argue for regulation, which I think is it's fair to argue for regulation in the name of those things, as long as that's actually what's happening. Which, whether or not that's happening is another topic that's heavily debated, and to some degree it's true and to some degree it isn't. And so kind of the argument over why or how, in what ways we use regulation is kind of it's a difficult conversation to have, but it's an important one, because people are arguing all the time that we should be focusing more on small farms instead of large farms, and that's another political issue, is small farm versus large farm. And at the same time, they're causing regulations that are killing the small farmer and bringing the large farmer back to full strength. And so it's kind of you're defeating the purpose with stuff like that. And so regulation is kind of one of the hot topic issues with politics and agriculture. In California, particularly, water is a big hot topic political issue, because we've been in and out of droughts for decades now, and the droughts are natural. I'm not going to say that they're not entirely environmentally motivated. They do have a lot of environmental influence, but a lot of the droughts in California are also political, because we have the water. It's just that it's not being allocated to the right places appropriately, because oftentimes the California government refuses to build infrastructure that would allow that water to be distributed effectively to the farmers that need it. And so it's when you get into issues like that kind of stuff, like the really the politics with agriculture is less. It's not like the politics we have in in regular society, where it has to do with identity and rights and all that kind of stuff. A lot of the politics in agriculture has to do with who's allowed to do what and how much. And so like the politics can go into like pesticide usage, it can go into water rights and ownership of land, it can go into taxes, it can go into like the politics around agriculture is very wide ranged, because it's just there's so many different things, and it depends on what you define as political. Like the environmental impact of agriculture is something that people often argue about a lot, but whether or not that's political is a different issue, because it can be considered political because it's the environment, and environment is a political issue. But agriculture in and of itself is an environmental practice because it has to work with the environment to even function. So is that political, or is that just debates over how the industry is doing its job? And so it kind of there's kind of a gray line on the politics in agriculture, but the main things that tend to be political issues in agriculture are regulations and allocation of resources.
So, how does this your passion of public speaking come into the factor? Is that a result of your agriculture and the politics behind it, that they try to regulate small versus large versus what have you? So to get the politics out of this, or I guess into it, I guess either way, that's kind of how your public speaking comes in, just kind of defending it type of thing. Is that kind of the gist of how you got into public speaking?
Kind of, yeah. So like I mentioned, I learned how to speak while I was in FFA, and the main reason that I learned how to speak was because I was pursuing a leadership role, and I saw the great leaders that were before me, and they were all great public speakers. And I was a really, really shy kid. I wasn't very, I wasn't very outgoing. I wasn't really like very loud spoken. I kind of just sat into myself and didn't really say much. But I was very good at speaking from what my teacher said. I didn't believe them, but when I actually did spoke, they were always impressed with what I said. And so it was more they were impressed with what I said. It's just how I said it that needed the work. So my teachers influenced me to take up public speaking and to start practicing it to become a stronger leader. And so I took their advice and I tried it. And when I got into public speaking, I was taught to speak by using agricultural issues as my grounds to give speeches on. So I was doing a contest called Extemporaneous Public Speaking, and Extemporaneous, or Extemp as we called it, was basically a contest where let's just assume we're in a contest setting. You would go into a room and you would pick a topic. So there'd be like 20 cards laid out on a table, and you can't see what any of them say. You just pick up 3 of them at random, you look at them, and on each of those cards is an agricultural issue, or it's a question, or it's something relating to agriculture. And it could be anything. And you read through the 3 questions and you pick one of them that you want to answer. And then off of that one, you have 30 minutes to write a 4 to 6 minute speech, and then you give it. And then after those 30 minutes, after the 30 minutes are up, you give your speech. And after your 4 to 6 minute speech, the judges have 5 minutes to ask you questions about anything you said. So it was a very intense, contest. And we were able to have research with us. I mean, we did I did months and months and months of research. Like I had probably 3 months before my first contest where I was doing research 4 or 5 hours a day, every day for 3 months straight. So we had binders. So we were allowed to have 5 100-page binders with us in the contest. And I filled mine up really quickly just because of the amount of research I was doing. And so, doing research on these issues and speaking on these issues and debating people on them and that sort of thing, answering questions really kind of, got me motivated about how serious some of them were and how nobody really talks about them much. And, while there's lobbyists and there's people that are fighting for some of these issues to be resolved, and there's, scientists trying to fix some of these issues with, the environmental impact and with, new practices and that kind of stuff, I was noticing that nobody was having the conversation about why nobody in the general public cares about agriculture anymore. Like your average consumer doesn't tend to think about agriculture as much as your average agriculturalist. And it's their food; they're the ones that get the final product at the end of the day. And so I figured that it'd be more important for them to hear it than anybody, because they're voting on the stuff that we're struggling with. And so that was what kind of motivated me to get more into public speaking, so I could do advocacy kind of stuff. So I could do the podcast, so I can do I've spoken on on several stages in front of large crowds about agricultural issues. And I've been able to kind of actually, teach people about agriculture and help them become interested and motivated in what's going on in the industry and, what issues it's facing and what it's doing well and how they can help. And so that was kind of the starting point for it. But I mean, as I've gotten into college and as I've, coached and mentored some students, and as I've kind of developed my own, leadership potential, my own kind of, my own image of who I am, I've just generally, come across public speaking as kind of a tool that I use now for everyday life. Actually, I've been a keynote speaker at a couple of conferences before that weren't about agriculture, and I actually am going to be a keynote speaker at a couple of conferences next week, and they're all so they're in virtual reality, so they're virtual reality conferences. But I'm going to be speaking on behalf of how to give a speech in virtual reality, and also like how to do mentoring and coaching and that kind of stuff. And so, like that kind of stuff has kind of showed me the power of public speaking and the utility of it. And it's kind of ironic because public speaking and agriculture suffer from the same issue. Everybody's scared to talk about them, or nobody cares enough to do it. And so I'm trying to bring awareness to both. That's why they're my two main passions, just because they get ignored way too often, and they're both extremely useful to have knowledge about.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, when I saw, well, other than the long list of what you sent me, but yeah, public speaking and agriculture, they neither one of them I'm too familiar with, and it was just kind of that combination by themselves would have been enough, but that combination was like, I need to have Brandon on my show to talk about those two things. And then I know you talked about the competition, and you had your 500 page binders. Now, when you're preparing for that, they give you like kind of topics of what could be discussed, or I mean, you're just kind of doing research on pretty much everything?
We have a general idea of what could be on there, but it's like basically how it works is so so the competition goes through different levels. So there's the chapter level or the sectional level, which means there's like, I don't know, 10, 20 other schools in your section. So you have the sectional level across them. You have the regional level, which goes, up to like, so California is split into 6 regions. So you take one of those regions and that's your entire, competition level. And then you go to the state level, which is against the entire state of California. And then you go to the national level, which is the entire country. So on the sectional, every year topics that were, let's just say they were state topics, they're going to get bumped down to regional, and then the regional topics go down to sectional, and the sectional topics are gone. And so we were able to kind of get an idea on what to expect just by looking at topics from previous years, but we had no idea what to expect in terms of what we were going to have to prepare for. So we basically just made a list of like, okay, these are topics that have been discussed in the past. Let's just have information ready on these, and then let's think of some other issues that are prevalent right now. So when I first started, it was 2016. And so we obviously had a new presidency, and there was some stuff going on with trade, and agriculture and trade is a very, important issue. And so we were kind of preparing like, okay, this stuff's happening with trade. We better be ready for a trade speech. And we didn't have anything on trade. So we had to do a bunch of research on, tariffs, on, new trade, what's what I'm looking for, like trade agreements, all kinds of stuff like that. So we basically had like a list of like, okay, those are always going to be topics that they're have to discuss. And that included like biotechnology, GMOs, urban sprawl, water, pesticides, antibiotics, like, hot topic issues like that. And then everything else was kind of like, what could they throw at us just in case? Because we get like weird stuff. Like we've been to contests, like completely prepared with 5 binders full of stuff on all kinds of science and policy and like, all these great stuff. And like one time a friend of mine got a question that was, if you could design an agricultural app for your phone, what would it be? Like, how do you write a 5-minute speech about that? So we'd have to have, just random stuff ready, just on the off chance we get something stupid like that. And so it was kind of just the whole, the whole important part of it was being able to think on your feet. You could use your resources, but you better be able to adapt quickly, because it was never like you pick it up and it just says GMO and you write a speech on GMOs. It was usually a question in the form of like, in what ways can agriculture improve the food safety, the nutrition and the food security of the United States over the next 30 years. And you have to be able to answer that. And so you say, okay, well, food safety, food security and nutrition, what can work with that? And so you take into the food safety, you take a little bit of GMO, you take a little bit of policy and regulation, and you tie all that together into a neat speech, and you give your speech. And the hard part was, if you're giving a speech on, let's just say it's on GMOs, for example, if you bring up water once in that speech, the judges can ask you any question they want about water. So you had to be really careful with what you brought up because they could quiz you on it. And if you don't know your stuff, then you basically got backed into a corner and you just fell apart.
All right, so this is going to be a really silly question, but can you describe what GMOs are?
Yeah. So for, for anyone who doesn't know, a GMO is it's a genetically modified organism. And so what that means is kind of up in the air right now because there's an official definition for a GMO and then there's a technical definition for a GMO. So technically, anything that's alive today is a GMO because we're not all our ancestors. Like, your dog is not the same. It does not look the same as the first dog that was ever born. Obviously, there's been some genetic variation through crossbreeding and all that kind of stuff. And so technically that'd be considered a genetically modified organism because his genes have been modified. But the official definition for GMO, like what people think of when they say GMO, is more accurately defined with genetically engineered modification or genetically engineered organism, or a GEO. And that is something that has had its genes altered artificially. So it doesn't naturally go through crossbreeding or anything like that. Like you're in a lab and you take the gene from one organism and put it into another, and it causes some kind of reaction in that gene's or in that organism's genotype. And so, like to give you an example, have you ever heard of golden rice?
No, not that I can think of off the top of my head.
Okay, so golden rice is an example of a GMO. It's rice, it's your regular white rice that has been genetically modified to be to have an increased beta carotene count, and so that means that it'll have more active amounts of vitamin A available into it that normally wouldn't be there. And the idea behind it was it's supposed to be cheap, it's supposed to be readily available, it's supposed to be healthy, and you can eat a lot of it in small portion or in small like a small amount of time. And they would be able to provide that to developing countries that don't have access to nutritious food that has a lot of vitamin A in it. And so that way it can benefit the nutrition and the general affordability and availability of food to developing countries. And so that would be an example of a GMO that's like rice doesn't naturally have high amounts of vitamin A in it, but they can modify by putting a gene in there from something that does, like a carrot or a pumpkin, and then that would boost the amount of vitamin A in that rice.
I was just going to say, when you can't decide if you want rice or a carrot, you can have golden rice, and you can have it at the same time.
There you go.
So going back to your state and regional and sectional competition, is there some type of a platform of which you can see it virtually, like for lack of terms, like a Twitch or something like that, where like they broadcast the state finals or the regionals things, or is that something that you physically have to go to possibly get your trickle down questions for the next years to come?
So you mean like in terms of how we prepare for the next topic, or for could just anyone watch it?
So a little bit of both. I mean, so
Okay.
if for someone who's preparing for this year's competition or next year, is there a digital place that you can go to that you can check on, what's the current hot button, or if you're just interested, or or do you have to physically go to these locations and just learn by going?
Well, yes and no. So for most of the sectional, regional, and sometimes even state level, you couldn't find them online anywhere. There's no YouTube video. There's no live streaming of any kind. They're just they're just localized competitions. So you have to be in the room to be able to watch them. But especially with this past year, with everything going on, they are moving all of the competitions online and virtual and making them virtual. I don't know if they're recording any of them, so you might be able to get access to them, that way. But I do know in years past, they have had the national competition recorded, because that's how I actually learned how to do extemporaneous. Was I watched the national videos for hours on end, and those are like the best of the best speakers. And so that could give you like a general idea of, for one, how to write the speech and how to give it, and kind of what a good speaker should look like, but also what kinds of issues they're looking at on the national scale versus the domestic scale. And so that was kind of a good indicator for people who are preparing, or for people who just wanted to hear it. The way we prepared was on the actual website for the state FFA organization. So for California State FFA, they had a list of all of the topics that were from each competition. And so you're able to kind of go back and see that and say, oh, okay, so state last year they talked about urban sprawl and ag mechanics a whole bunch. I better have that ready for my regional competition.
Yeah, I was just going to ask. I mean, if there wasn't live video or recorded video, was there some type of like transcripts or, someone, kind of wrote down generalized topics of what they talked about so that you have some type of a source to look at for in the future? Now, also, you said something about your keynote speeches. Well, you said virtually. Oh, actually, you said virtual reality. I'm like, you're talking about, virtual reality as in that, or just that's the space that you're going to be providing your keynote speech in?
Oh no, it's entirely. So I got my Oculus Quest right down here. So yeah, so I'm actually going to be in the headset, with my controllers, actually giving the speech on a virtual stage in front of a virtual crowd, using a social VR app called AltSpace.
And so, is that going to be a localized event only for whoever's attending? I mean, since you are already virtual, I mean, is that, like I said, is it only for the people who are there, or is it someplace that can be streamed live or seen later on?
Yeah, no, that's actually an entirely public event. So anyone who has access to a VR headset, or even if you don't, you can go on to the AltSpace website and use the 2D desktop version to be able to watch the event. And it's going to be recorded and live streamed, so you'll be able to watch it while it's happening and also afterwards. So those speeches are for, like I said, they're for conferences that are entirely independent of anything I do. I was kind of just asked to come on because they know my speaking ability. And so they kind of just thought it'd be cool. So yeah, anyone who wants to watch that stuff they have full access to it.
So, do you feel relief that you don't have to talk about agriculture? You can get spread out other ways, or are you kind of disappointed that you're going away from your home base type of thing?
It's a bit of, again, it's a bit of both. I really enjoy talking about agriculture, but at the same time, I have a podcast where I talk about it, and I talk about it to people all the time. So I do get a little burnt out at times. There are definitely days where I just don't even want to think about agriculture. I just want to talk about something else. Even if it's something silly and kind of goofy, like Star Wars or video games or just anything that's not serious. And there's other times where I just want to talk about mentoring and leadership and public speaking and kind of just help people develop their own stuff. Like I don't know. So for these speeches, I'm really excited that I get to kind of talk about something that's not agriculture for once, because I think that'll be kind of a nice change of pace, and it's a good challenge because I was trained to speak on agriculture. I was not trained to speak on anything else, and so it kind of forces me to work outside my comfort zone and learn how to speak on things that I'm typically not used to speaking on.
So, since you're heavily involved in agriculture, do you have people that are close to you that kind of like are almost glad that you get a chance to like break free and talk about something else? I mean, are they like, all right, enough about the cattle. I've heard enough about the grass feeding and the heifers. Can we talk about like soda or or whatever?
Yeah, no, I actually, so my family gets like that all the time because they come from agriculture, so they know. I mean, if I talk to any issues, about any issues to them, they're like, yeah, we get it. Like we read the newspaper too. Like you don't have to tell us. And so like they get a little tired of it. They like to talk about other stuff, which I'm fine with. But like my roommates and my girlfriend and my other friends, they really are like, even though some of them come from agricultural backgrounds, they still enjoy learning about all the stuff that I have to talk about, just because it's not something they think about on a daily basis. But they're even like, I mean, my roommates, for example, we have sessions where we kind of just sit down and talk for 2 or 3 hours about whatever comes up. And sometimes it's agriculture, sometimes it's not. They actually ask me questions a lot of the time. So like the other day we were sitting at the table eating breakfast, and my roommate asked me why milk is white, and the difference between milk that's white and milk that's not white, and kind of like all that kind of stuff. And so we had a whole discussion about the dairy industry and cow biology. And then after that, we wanted to talk about public speaking. And then after that, we started talking about video games. Like it depends on where the conversation goes. It's not necessarily that they, I don't just rant to them about agriculture and they just get tired of it. Usually they start it, or I start talking about something else, and ag just kind of slides its way into the conversation.
So I'm kind of curious now, why is milk white? And then when you get like almond milk, it's kind of that weird beige color. It's like, I got milk.
Mm-hmm.
No, that doesn't look like milk that I've ever seen.
So milk is white mainly because it's just mostly calcium. If you think about your bones being white, your bones are mostly calcium as well. So the calcium content in milk is actually what makes it, what gives it its color. And there are other varieties of milk that are, either they're less dominant in calcium, or they have another maybe they are the same amount of calcium, but they have another nutrient in there that's even more dominant. So there's a breed of dairy cattle called oh, what's it called, Guernseys. And so Guernsey is kind of like a red, like a reddish white. It's got like, it's basically think of like a black and white cow, but it's got red, red spots instead of black. And they're a little bit shorter than your average cow, and they're less popular in dairy production, but they are used in like Wisconsin. And there's a couple of states that actually like using Guernseys. Guernsey milk is actually super high in vitamin A, so it's kind of like the golden rice. And so as we talked about, the rice turns kind of a golden orange color, and carrots and pumpkins turn orange because they are high in vitamin A. Guernsey milk is also kind of an orangish brown color, and so you'll have things like you mentioned, like the almond milk is often kind of a more beige color than it is white. That's just because the nutritional content is different in almond milk than it is in other things. And so when it comes to like even like what's interesting, I was talking to him about like human milk, like female, like whenever females breastfeed, and whenever a woman breastfeeds, when her baby is sick, the milk will actually adjust its antibodies and adjust its what's actually in the milk to try to help the baby get over its illness faster. And so because like the connection between the mother and the baby through breastfeeding basically like scans the baby body and says, okay, there's something in there that's not supposed to be in there. Here's some antibodies, kill it. And so what's funny about it is whenever it does that, the woman's breast milk actually changes color sometimes.
I I would have never thought to even ask that question, but that's good to know. So I mentioned other kinds of milk like coconut and almond. So, like with a dairy cow, there is a teat there to milk. There's a female breast to milk. And how do those like almond, coconut, oat milk? How do they kind of come into the process of being a liquid form?
Yeah, so obviously this is kind of the common joke is like where's the udder on an almond? You can't milk an almond like you can milk a cow. And so the process behind making almond milk, I'm actually not entirely familiar with the entire process, but I do know that it has to do with extracting the moisture from an almond. So usually it could be like grinding it up, and then like you grind it up until it's basically like there's like nothing left, and you kind of extract the moisture out of it. Or it could be maybe there's some kind of like mixture that they put it into, and it kind of dissolves the almond into the mixture. I just know that it's they just use like the whole almond. Like I said, it's not like they're actually milking an almond. So like there's something a little bit more technical there. That's obviously not, they don't have a dairy operation set up for it.
Because at least with coconuts, there's at least that coconut water on the inside. I mean, but there's also coconut milk as well. So I just it's kind of always weird to like have how they have all these different varieties of milk, and I'm like, well, that's their plants or their droops or their what have you.
So I just looked it up right now. It says almond milk is made by blending almonds with water and then straining the mixture to remove the solids. So yeah, there you go. You just mix it with some water, and then you mix it up, and then you just kind of run it through probably a some kind of sifter, or something that can get the solids out of it, and then you have almond milk.
So easier than I kind of thought. I mean, I'm sure that yeah, every company adds their own flair to have it. This is a diamond, and
Oh
this
yeah,
is the other kind.
yeah.
I mean, for the last hour or so, we've been pretty much talking about agriculture. Is what when you're not agriculturing, like what kind of hobbies or interests are you into that are kind of completely separate, or are you like all agriculture and a little Oculus every once in a while?
So that's kind of the funny thing is people assume that my entire life revolves around agriculture, and to a degree it does. That is going to be my future career, and that's kind of what I base my knowledge set around. But I am a massive just nerd. So like I love video games and movies and sci-fi and kind of stuff like I'm a big fan of like Star Wars and Marvel and DC and all that. So I'll spend a lot of time just kind of watching movies and YouTube videos on that, playing with my Oculus, playing on my Xbox, just like I was talking to you about before the episode, I recently got into card games. So I grew up playing like Yu-Gi-Oh, and then I was like collecting Pokemon cards, but recently I learned how to play Magic the Gathering, and I picked Yu-Gi-Oh back up, and I learned how to play the Pokemon card game, and so I've been playing those a whole bunch. I mess around with like just to show you, I don't know if you can see this, but I've got my Lego Boba Fett on my desk. So kind of mess around with with that kind of stuff. Just kind of like to hang out and just have fun. Like I go for walks a lot. My roommates and I will just go for walks a lot, just just to get out of the house. So that's something I like to do. I mean, it's hard for me to say that I have like a hobby just because I don't know what's considered a hobby and what's not. Like I consider my podcast a hobby, but I'm not sure if it can still be considered a hobby because of how much time a week I invested into it.
Yeah.
But like I so the long and short of it, my I would say like my non-serious hobbies are like gaming and looking up like weird science stuff. And like I used to be like a big science, which I still am a big science nerd, but I used to be like huge into like technology and like prosthetics and like the future and all that kind of stuff. So I used to like do tons of research on that kind of stuff, and just kind of nerding out about everything's going on in the world, AI and robots and the fun stuff.
So I'm hearing you like to do research on whatever you're into. You're diving into the research category. You want to know as much as you can about, and I guess this shows by the list of things that you said you're passionate about, science and body language reading, and which I mean, I guess that kind of goes into public speaking as well. I mean, if you're looking at the audience, and you can kind of gauge how they're feeling just by just their body language. You can adjust your comments and statements accordingly, which I kind of need to learn that because I get in
Mhm.
trouble talking to the wife. So I'll wait till she's mad and then just slam more onto her. But like, there's no point of, she's already mad. I can't, she's already gone. I've already gone down this rabbit hole. I might as well see how far it'll go. So there's no point of bringing her down when she's high. So
Yeah, no, I mean, that's just kind of, to your point, body language is something that I've really taken an interest to, but that kind of goes in with like the public speaking kind of stuff. It's really useful to know that, and like, just get involved in everyday interactions. You can save yourself from getting mad, or from somebody else getting mad at you. Or you can make somebody mad if you really want to. You can figure out ways that will kind of, push their buttons a little bit harder. But yeah, no, it's kind of, the thing I always tell my roommates, because, or just pretty much anyone, because I'll just like randomly spout off just random facts and just like on like stuff that has nothing to do with anything we're talking about. I'll just say, hey, did you know that a platypus has a poisonous spur on the back of its heel? And just like the most random stuff that has nothing to do with anything that's going on. And they're just like, dude, how do you know so much? And basically my answer is, anytime I have a question about anything, it doesn't matter how stupid the question is, I do like an hour of research on it just to make sure I really know. Because like how like there's like the whole, like you're watching a YouTube video and you click on the recommended and you click on another recommended and you just kind of fall down the YouTube hole.
yeah.
I do that with research.
Well, I mean, don't they have their hooks on both feet? It's not like just one. It's not like you got to watch out for the left foot because that's where
Yeah.
the actual hook is. But yeah, is it like a neurotoxin,
Yeah.
or is it just a venom, or
It's it's like a neurotoxin that kind of paralyzes you temporarily. Actually, it can kill dogs.
Hmm. And do they do they have teeth, or is it just like the strong like beak type of thing? As far as
I
platypuses, not
don't
dogs.
have teeth. Yeah. As far as I know, they don't have teeth. I think they just have a bill. They might have like small teeth just for breaking, like breaking through food or something, but I'm pretty sure it's just their bill. But they have like the weirdest, like they have weird mating rituals. They have weird, like they're goofy animals.
Yeah, so it's kind of like a duck mixed with a stingray mixed with a beaver, if I'm not, mistaken. In a
Yeah, no,
sense,
pretty much. And a kangaroo. Don't forget about the kangaroo. Or no, not even a kangaroo. That's an echidna. Because they lay eggs too, and their eggs, like, because they don't have any proper way of nursing, so they just like sweat out milk, and their offspring just like lick the milk off of them. Like, it's just, they are weird animals.
Yeah, because they're not marsupials, right? Because they give birth to eggs. So yeah, that's it's totally they're in their own league, right? I mean, I don't think they have anything else that's close to them without like mashing things together.
No. Yeah, no, there's some weird theories about, like how evolution worked along that line. It was like something that laid eggs, like some kind of weird reptile duck thing, and then platypus, and then echidna, and then kangaroo, and then us, or something like that.
So that's one of those natural GMOs then.
Right, exactly. Yep.
I think I learned a lot about agriculture and things of that nature. So before I end this episode, can you remind the people of where they can find you if they want to hear more about agriculture or listen to your podcast, what have you? Tell people where they can find you.
Absolutely. So once again, my name is Brendan Black. I run a podcast called Talk Ag to Me, and it's Talk AG, to me. And despite popular belief, ag is not short for silver; it's short for agriculture. You'd be surprised how many people will actually make that mistake. But you can find Talk Ag to Me anywhere you find podcasts. I'm also on YouTube and anywhere on social media. Just search up Talk Ag to Me. I'm guarantee you'll find me. And my own stuff is just Brendan Black, and it's BRENDAN, and then Black like the color. And you guys are more than welcome to reach out to me if you have any questions about anything I do, agriculture, public speaking, mentorship kind of stuff. Even if you just want to talk about platypuses for a little bit, that's fine too. I'm always up for fun conversations and answering questions and making new friends. And so, yeah, that's kind of that's my stuff.
Awesome. Like I said, so if we have nothing else to say, I'm just going to say goodbye, everybody. You have been listening to Firing Synapses with Matt Hamady. I want to thank everyone who listened to the show. If you enjoyed today's episode, please share it with your friends. Also, feel free to send all questions, comments, constructive criticisms, and new topics to mhamidyphoto@gmail.com. That's MHAMIDY photo@gmail.com. It just may end up on a future episode. If you would also like to help the show, you can follow me on all your social media platforms, which includes Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. It only takes a couple of seconds, and it's still free. Otherwise, goodbye, everybody.